This year we celebrate 200 years since the opening of our church in Caroline Street. The events that led to the building of the church were when, in the early 1800s, several parishioners withdrew from the local parish church after the departure of a popular low church minister who was not easily replaced. This group found a room in St Martin's Lane and appointed a local man called John Conder as their honorary pastor.
And when our church came together in Caroline Street, they'd met in various other places before then. Do you know what the size of the congregation was when it first came together?
No, it just says that it was a group of parishioners, but the fact that it said that it was growing, and then when the church first was established with a pastor in 17, that suggests that it was only a handful when it first broke out, but it just continued to grow from that handful. A bit like a house church, I suppose, and just fitting in a house, and then outgrowing the house and needing a bigger premises, and then getting to the point where you actually needed a church building because there were too many to handle. As the congregation grew, these premises proved to be too small, so they moved from St Martin's Lane to a court off Market Street. And this in turn was followed by the building of our church in Caroline Street, Lane End, which later merged with next door Longton. Building began in 1819 with a plaque at the side of the building showing this date, but the building was officially opened on April the 24th, 1820, and a church was formally formed in January 1821. When the roll was signed by the pastor and 17 other people, so a little smaller in number than those we have today. By 1851, the average attendance at the church had grown to 150 in the morning and 200 for evening service, with a Sunday school of 200. As numbers increased, there was a need for a larger building, and the main church in which we meet today, when not in lockdown, was erected in front of the old one in 1905. By 1957, the membership of the church had dwindled to an average of 59, and further decreases meant that closure was imminent. However, a local farmer by the name of Mr. Eric L. Thompson and his wife stepped in and saved it after selling his 100-acre dairy farm. The church was in a dreadful state of repair, but with continued hard work, he managed to restore much of the interior, decorating it with flowers every Sunday and distributing them to worshippers after evening service.
When I first came to the church, I had the pleasure of meeting him. And I went out to Market Drayton, where he was in a nursing home at the time. And I met him, and he told me how much he really got involved in the local community, and he would send a little leaflet out on a regular basis into all the houses in the local neighbourhood. And he wrote a letter to me not long after that meeting, and it was the blessing, the priestly blessing from Numbers. We often use it at the end of the service, and it's that song that is very popular at the moment as well. So I remember him well.
During this time, the church once again flourished, and there was again a thriving Sunday school. The church later became a Baptist church before it became Lifeline Community Church in 2003, which has since been renamed to Longton Community Church. Throughout the 200 years, our church has continued to worship God and serve the community. The church has a long history going back to the 1850s of involvement with the community and support to people who are vulnerable because of the effects of poverty. One historical photo of the church was taken during the coal strike in 1912, when the church was providing tea for families suffering hardship. The church was described as being more in the nature of a community hall than a church, being adapted to the character of work needed to be done in the district.
What was that like?
So that would have been very hard because, Longton in the Potteries, not exactly an affluent area. So with the miners' strike, it would have hit people very hard, and there wouldn't have been obviously anything like we get today of any sort of support. So the church was standing in the breach really, and meeting that need for the community, and ensuring that everyone who was in need was helped.
There's one thing that I've noticed in the church, in the building itself, just outside the front door, there are two big metal pieces where the miners would have scraped their shoes to clean their shoes to come in.
Oh, definitely, yes.
So yeah, it's just what the need of that community was like. But it's brilliant that the church was able to help all those miners.
So moving on from there, the church was also had members who were going out to the war, so there would have been families to help at that time going forward. And even after the war, then going into the 20s, there was the depression, the general strike of 1926. So that would have been something that would have continued on, and the church would have been central to all that was going on at that time. And this purpose of worshipping God and serving the community continues right to the present day and into the next 200 years.
It's interesting to think that worship has been going on for 200 years. May not always been in the same style, but there's been that worship of God there all the while, hasn't there?
There has. Yeah, we've seen that the building changes. We've done things so the physical fabric of the building has changed even in the last 20 years, 15, 20 years. But yes, like you say, that the actual style of worship, that the people who were there have changed it. But that's the great thing about the family of God, that yes, we're all different people, but we're all one family.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? And it's been lovely to see that over the 200 years, really, that it's been that one family that's been worshipping God all the way through.
Yes, yeah.
I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce Alan to you. Alan's Scotland. He has been in ministry for something like 35 years. He travels throughout the world, like UK, Africa, USA, South America, China, Hong Kong, India, Europe. He's on the board of UCB. He's the founder of LifeLink International, and as a church, we're part of that group. He is respected as a pastor to the pastors, sort of thing. So he works very closely with me on a one-to-one basis, and he works with me in a leadership sort of setting as well. So over to Alan to share a word for us now. Thank you.
Greetings to the Community Church at Longton. I know that this is a very special time of celebration for the amount of period that you've been in the facility and at work there in Longton. And I knew that I was scheduled to try and be there to celebrate with you your anniversary. But I just want to say, in spite of the lockdown, here we are. I've got a word for you to bless you, and you're most welcome to drink of it. All the best to you, praying much for you. Well done, Andy and Angie, for all that you've done and the team with you. God bless. See you soon. What a joy to be with you. I want to share with you from the Psalms for this short time that we have together. I'm particularly taking the Psalms because they are what they call the sacred songs. They are probably the most prized and read version of the Bible itself, because people seem to turn to the Psalms for encouragement, for uplifting, for inspiration, especially in times of trouble. I want to share a particular psalm with you, but before I go there, I want to just give you some idea of the context of the book of Psalms. In fact, people would tell you, those who are in the know, that there are 5 main books of Psalms. So So in those 5 divisions, we have the whole gambit of the message of God to us in a poetic, lyrical, or songful, joyful expression of the goodness of God. So I'm going to show you them. First of all, the first book of Psalms is from Psalm 1 to 41. The second book of Psalms is from Psalm 42 to 72. And then the third is from Psalm 73 to 89, followed by Psalms 90 to 106. And finally, the fifth book is from Psalm 107 to 150. Out of all those Psalms, 150 Psalms, David is the one who's related to 73 of them. And it's interesting to note this, that Calvin in his time said this about the Psalms. They are an anatomy of all parts of the soul. I like that. For no one will find in the Psalms that it does not reflect them in the mirror. In other words, when you read the Psalms, you can identify with the expressions that are being shared. Then Scroggie, he is a great writer too in the past, and he said this: the Psalms are essentially religious. They express the doubts, the fears, the joys, the longings, the gratitude, the hope of generations of pious souls, and in so doing, they reveal the heart of God's people in all ages. So crucially, though the Psalms may be poetic, they're also prophetic. Not only are they prophetic, they expound, as they do, the purposes of God for humanity, the earthiness of them, and the way God is involved in the earthly, everyday encounters of human life. So comprehensively, the Psalms will bring us to understand that God is king and that God rules in the universe that he creates. He doesn't need your permission or my permission. He's the creator, we are the creature. And so the psalmists, when they express, both through experiences or special occasions, their expression of song and worship, they comprehend something of the majesty of God. And the majesty of God does not keep him away from his people, but in his grace and in his mercy and his compassion, he's with them in every chapter of their lives. In fact, even Jesus said this in Luke chapter 2, verse 44. All things must be fulfilled which were written in the Psalms concerning me. So often we will take a psalm because it really revitalizes us, speaks into us, lifts us up, but at the same time we have to be careful that we don't manipulate the psalm to satisfy just our own interests. The Psalms actually show us the true account of humanity in need of God, and humanity connecting to God, and humanity expressing the worship back to the Creator. And that's not done just in a meeting. That's in the way we live our lives, not just talk our lives, or not just sing our lives. So I want to take one psalm in particular today for you, Psalm 34. I've heard it so many times being shared. People have been so encouraged by these words. And I'm going to read some of the verses to you in Psalm 34, if you've got a moment to get your Bibles. Do you no harm to mark it? That's up to you. But I want to talk about the discontinuity of our times. And this is what David himself had to go through, who is the writer of this Psalm 34. The times, they weren't quite coming together. Something was dislocated. Things were being tested. Not least himself, he'd been anointed for so long. And yet still, it took at least 10 years, a decade, before David came into the fulfillment of all that God had for him in the anointing that he received from Samuel. But he pens this psalm And the reminder to us is that he was having to escape at least 6 attempts upon his life when he penned this. In other words, he wasn't wrapped up in cotton wool. In other words, he wasn't devoid of challenges. And that's what I want us to be encouraged with. This is how it reads. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord will lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I'll teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to blot out their name from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and save those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, and not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked. The foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned. One has to grasp something of the gravity of what's being shared here. This is not something aloof to reality. This is making it very clear that just because you trust in the Lord does not mean you'll face trouble. You won't face trouble. Because you trust in the Lord doesn't mean your life is going to be free of all the challenges. No, this is the whole sanctification process of God taking us through trial and tribulation and suffering. So let's not have this fictitious expression of faith that means that we don't encounter hardship. Even Jesus himself made it plain that in the world you will have persecution, tribulation, but be of good cheer, be encouraged, because I'll be with you. So we've got to be very careful of this isolationist approach even as Christians, that we think that we are covered in silk and we're wrapped up, as I've said before, in cotton wool. No, there's far more to it. Because even Jesus, who went through all stages of his ministry, was deeply persecuted. Troubling times from the birth onwards right through to the finality of his walk on this earth, when he was crucified, tortured, made a show of for you and for me. And even there, the citation that Jesus emphasizes, that not one of my bones will be broken. The truth is, it didn't mean he didn't suffer. He suffered greatly and deeply. But through it all, he triumphed. Through it all, he grew in knowledge and understanding of our humanity. And I come to us today and I say, let's get real. Our world is in grief. Nations are in pain. Families are devastated. And it's all walks of life, all shapes of life, all ages, each one a tragedy in itself. We have an enemy, of course we do, and an unseen enemy at that. But the call of God to us is this: come on now, find your refuge in me. Don't allow yourself to be robbed of your vitality. Allow me to be the source of your sustenance. And so the psalmist has the reason to say what he says, because he's walking the harsh realities of life. What I love about David is not just was he a good politician, he was a psalmist. He loved to worship God. He was a worship leader par excellence. He wasn't doing it to make the money. He was doing it from the depth of his heart. He was worshiping God. He had to learn how to cope with politics, and so we could go on. He was from a child keenly aware of the reality of God. Don't you underestimate. God can be real to the youngest of our children. Maybe for you, in your life, you've encountered God as a child. Maybe you're far away from where you were as a child in simple trust and profound faith in God. I'm calling you to come back to that reality. You're never too big. You're never too old. You're never too late. Seek the Lord while he might be found. But somehow, some way, his eloquence in worship still inspires you and me today. That's the kind of worship I like. I don't want the worship that's effeminate. I don't want the worship that will be unreal. I don't want the worship that's about my voice. I want the worship that comes from a heart that wants to honor God and worship God. If he would be the recipient of fees for the copyright of songs, he would be one of the richest worship leaders of all time. But he made his music, he made his song available for people to enter into worship with him. We as a people cannot help but appreciate the earthiness and the sublime spirituality of worship that comes from this psalm. King David is likened to a person whose head is anointed with oil and whose cup overflows. The context of the psalm is very interesting. As I said before, he did not have an easy life. I want to just say to you, that's the reality. God is with us in our suffering. God is with us in our testing. And his words mean so much to us as ordinary, everyday folk, because he can identify with us. And you know what I love about David? He was not perfect. He had his problems. He had his challenges. He had his mistakes, and some of them were massive. Some of the stuff that he got up to got in the way of his gift and in the way of his ministry. He had a passion, though, for God and a passion for life, and he could recount his adventures. He certainly did not live a boring life. That's a religious kind of life. There's nothing boring about knowing God. There's nothing heavy about understanding God's word. There's nothing intense that robs you of your humanity. On the contrary, you rediscover your humanity when you come back to the place you were born for, to worship the Lord with all your heart, not just in the song, but in the expression of your life. To an uninformed person, everything went his way. However, crisis followed him all the days of his life. He'd experienced hardship. He'd experienced profound grief. He was acutely aware of his own failures. God help us to be like that too, humble of heart. He'd experienced betrayal. My, there's nothing more painful than betrayal of a friend and betrayal of friends. He passed through times of deep depression. I know people don't like to talk about that. Today, this is a serious issue for us. A sound mind, that the Lord might come and lift us from a low ebb of spirit because a low ebb of spirit can destroy your physical and emotional health. And so David went through times of depression. He passed through those times. He didn't camp at them. Even in his lowest moments like this psalm, how can you get such beautiful words? I'll lift up the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. Do you know what he's saying? I get it. I get it. It's me who's wrong, not God. It's my limited understanding that gets in the way. And that's true for most people who don't even believe in God. They have a notion of God that's totally skewed. In fact, the Bible teaches us that they're blinded to how beautiful God really is. Because if they could see how beautiful he is, then they'd serve him and lay down their lives for him. So he passed through times of deep depression, yet he proved to be, to me at least, a champion of kings, a forerunner of the greater King Jesus, King David, who is yet to come on the throne for eternity that we've heard about before. But this whole psalm is an acrostic poem, so that every letter of the Hebrew alphabet covers one line at a time, so that every time he's making a point, he's using the whole of the alphabet to express his worship. In other words, the comprehensive way in which we should worship God is what he was saying. I'll extol the Lord at all times. All times. When the going's good, that's easy. When we're feeling excited, that's easy. But when we're being tested, that's when it's most precious. When we break open the alabaster box, so to speak, and we give God our praise and our worship. This echoes in my own heart. I'll never forget the moment that Jesus Christ revealed himself to me in response to a heartfelt cry out to him as a boy of 10 years of age. It's ingrained in my soul. It remains as an undeniable reality to me that God is real, and he does respond to the heartfelt cry of the human being. My. If only you could believe, if you call upon the Lord, he will answer. And that's what the psalmist talks about. So this is a transformation that takes place inside of the little soul. I pray for our children. I pray for our children's children. I believe God's at work in their soul. Don't ever get in the way of that. Encourage them to call upon the Lord. Pray with them. Simple prayers. Encourage them to pray, one for the other. The transformation that takes place in the human heart, however young, however old, when we turn to the Lord. There's no religiosity in the words of David. It's poetic, but it's sound and it's real. So I want to come back to this harsh reality of life. David experienced 6 attempts to kill him. So he was a wanted man. Yet worship was never a performance for him. It was an expression of his deep indebtedness to the mercy of God in his life. When people shout out the name of God as a curse word, how far removed are they from an understanding of how beautiful God is? That's not to point the finger. That's just to say, you know what? If only you could see how beautiful he is, you'd never ever take his name in vain. So this discontinuity is very real for David. But what is constant in the discontinuity is a heartfelt worship for God. And in times of discontinuity, we need to be constant about this. We need to know how to, first of all, in our worship, to trust. And the first 11 verses express this in a variety of ways, the continuity of trust. I can't tell you how many times God has delivered when I've been in desperate need. Provision financially, helping us as small churches to find facilities, to find the money to be able to purchase them, to be able to do what we do to make them useful for the community. I am grateful to God. I thank God for my first house. When we didn't have the money to pay for the house, God supplied. And if I had time to tell you, you'd be amazed at the provision of God. So continuity of trust in verse 1, verse 4, verse 6, verse 1, at all times. Verse 4, verse 6, whatever we might find ourselves going through, to know deep within our soul that we can trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not to our own understanding. So that's the first thing, continuity of trust in this psalm. And then the contagion of a positive outlook. It's enough to know that fear is contagious. When you keep hearing the negative, when you keep hearing the soundings that lack any hope or any faith, it's like being in a grave instead of a tunnel. I can cope with a tunnel because I know there's a way out, but a grave, it's a dead end. Excuse the pun. But contagion of a positive outlook. Are you that kind of person? Can you say, whatever might come your way, my trust is in the Lord. Even though I can't trace him, I will trust him. Glorify the Lord with me, verse 3 it says. Glorify the Lord with me. Let's exalt his name together. If you believe that's true, why don't you just text that right now? Why don't you put your thumb up and say, yeah, that's me. I'm with you, Alan. I believe we must trust in the Lord and lean not to our own understanding. We'll glorify the Lord with me. Let's exalt his name together. So we've established that there are many challenges we face in our daily living, such as disappointments, discouragements. Yet through it all, David never allowed it to permanently rob him of his uplook in life. He was able to look up and say, in God is my trust. So let's be contagious in the right sense. Let's have a positive contagion. Let's pass on the words of hope. Let's pass on the spirit of trust in God. And this will be our true worship. Verses 4 to 7, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and delivered him out of all his troubles. What's it saying? He has companionship with his Maker. Don't be the first to complain. Be the first to call upon the Lord. Don't be one of those people that are always seeing only the negative. You may be finding even in the lockdown that we're going through. You might find it a bit claustrophobic. You might find sometimes your relationships are tested if you're confined to a small space. If you've got a garden, stop complaining. What about those that have got no garden, that are locked in their flats with children and have nowhere to go? Come on now, let's lift up our hearts. Celebrate, not just tolerate. We have a companionship with God, our Maker. Verses 4 to 7. Verses 8 to 10, celebrate, not just tolerate. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. I want to celebrate, not just tolerate. Verses 8 to 10. And then verse 11, the characteristics of the fear of the Lord. Come, my children, listen to me. I'll teach you the fear of the Lord. This phrase occurs 138 times in the Old Testament. It's in two words. It is two words in the Hebrew language. It's not fear of the Lord, it's fear the Lord. And I want to say to you, whatever you might be going through, trust him, respect him, honor him, listen to him, keep your tongue, depart from evil, seek peace, and pursue it. I don't want to take much longer with you, but a blessed life is a sustained life. God is able to sustain us in the difficulties that we face. It doesn't mean that we're trouble-free. Life as it was for David, John the Baptist, Jesus was not trouble-free. But the hallmark is That's a life that is watched over. The eyes of the Lord are upon us. I come to you today and say, come on now, lift up your heart. Worship the Lord with me. And if you believe this is true, share what I've shared with you today. Pass it on, the news to encourage others. I wish you and pray for you God's best. But I don't ask him to make it trouble-free. I make it to be a real maturing process for every one of us at whatever stage of our faith that we're at. Whether we're young or whether we're old, we can prove that we can bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall be continually in our mouths. If this has been a blessing to you today, let us know. Encourage us to keep sharing the word of the Lord. And may I say this to you, it's very important that we take time to come together around God's word. I know people want to do fun things, and that's great. We need all of that. But we equally need to know the word of the Lord in times of trouble. Till the next time, the Lord bless you, the Lord keep you, and keep you as a shining beacon for those that are in darkness today. God bless you.